Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for tuning in this afternoon to this special broadcast of Always on Trial, the relationship between the Black community and police. I'm Quentin at Make It Work, Nevada, your organizing home for building power. I deeply appreciate you tuning in for such an important conversation today. Listen, in the span of the last 2 weeks, it's been exceptionally unsettling. We've had the verdict of in the Derek Chauvin trial, while we've consistently seen the ongoing killing of people, particularly Black people, at the hands of law enforcement. Ma'Khia Bryant, Adam Toledo, Andrew Brown are just some of the names of individuals that have since lost their lives at the hands of police violence since the Derek Chauvin trial has ended. So we wanted to have this very important conversation about the relationship between law enforcement and the Black community. Joining me today, I have our very own Nevada Attorney General Aaron Ford. He was elected as Nevada's 34th Attorney General after serving 6 years in the Nevada Senate, including as both the minority leader and the majority leader. Attorney General Ford earned his bachelor's degree from Texas A&M University in interdisciplinary studies and his master's in international education from the George Washington University. He also earned a master's degree in educational administration and his law degree and PhD in educational administration from the Ohio State University. The Attorney General is goals as I'm reading this bio. I have something to aspire to. Mr. Attorney General, thank you for joining us. In addition, we have our Make It Work Nevada Ambassador Thaddeus Bennett joining us. He is a husband, father, and work-at-home dad. Thaddeus is a new Nevadan as he and his family have officially hit the 1-year mark as residents in the great state of Nevada. Thaddeus is eager to leave a footprint on the state and become an advocate towards equality and community involvement. Thaddeus, thank you for joining us, brother. I really appreciate it. And finally, we have another Make It Work Nevada ambassador, Casey Christian. He is a student of criminology and sociology. He's also an actor and author of the Casey Children's Book Series and community activist. Casey is currently working at Oscillero Learning Head Start Center as a family advocate. Casey, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it, man. Good evening, good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Fantastic. I'm really eager to have this conversation and glad that you all could join me. I'm just going to jump right in. It was about 2 weeks ago, almost 2 weeks, I think, where we saw the verdict of the Derek Chauvin trial come down. I want to direct this question to the Attorney General. Can you describe for us, Attorney General Ford, the charges that Officer Chauvin was facing? We heard about it in the news, right? But for folks that aren't steeped in legal terminology, can you explain what those charges were and the scope of that, and the scope of what those charges encompass?
Well, first off, Quentin, thank you so much for including me in this important conversation, and kudos to Make It Work Nevada for sponsoring and putting it on as well. I'm honored to be on screen with colleagues Thaddeus and KC. I'm looking forward to this conversation. To your specific question, Mr. Chauvin was convicted of second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter, all under Minnesota law. I'm not a Minnesota lawyer, let's be clear, but I wanted to, so I did some research to see how they define it under their particular laws. And these are all very serious charges. For second-degree unintentional murder, the jury had to find that beyond any reasonable doubt, Mr. Chauvin had caused Mr. Floyd's death while assaulting him. The defense in this case, as we all know, tried to offer other causes of death, but clearly the jury didn't accept those explanations. As I understand it, Minnesota generally defines third-degree murder solely as depraved heart murder, without intent to effect the death of any person, causing the death of another person by perpetrating an act eminently dangerous to others, and evincing a depraved mind without regard for human life. And that may sound like a bunch of legalese as well, but that's the best I can offer relative to that definition. And then the second-degree manslaughter under Minnesota law means that Chauvin was found guilty of having taken a conscious risk that Floyd's life that resulted in his death. As we all know, Mr. Chauvin hasn't been sentenced yet, but prosecutors have said that they intend to seek what's called aggravated sentencing charges above the presumed sentence. The presumed sentence in this case is about 12 and a half years. I want to commend my colleague in Minnesota, Attorney General Keith Ellison. and his entire team for an excellent job in prosecuting this case and doing so with the utmost professionalism.
Absolutely. We second those sentiments of Attorney General Ellison in Minnesota. A question to the broader group: did you watch the trial? I found for myself it was very challenging to watch the trial. I watched a day and a half, perhaps, and I just found some of the arguments to be a little misleading. I didn't understand why we needed to be discussing Mr. Floyd's heart condition or his opioid addiction when the entire world watched him be murdered on camera. So I want to pose a question, and I'll start with that. What was it like for you watching the trial or not watching the trial?
So I did tune in, and I do actually want to start by saying thank you to Make It Work Nevada for this platform, and Attorney General Ford specifically for being present to discuss this unequivocal war on Black lives. And Casey, I appreciate you being on as well. I tuned in because honestly, it was my duty to tune in. You know, I felt that I knew what was coming. I knew that a guilty verdict was going to come, but in the back of my mind, I was saying, you know what, honestly, the system has failed Black lives before, so it potentially can happen again. So when that verdict did come down, initially I was a little relieved because, you know, in that case, justice was served, you know, for George Floyd. However, I then thought, and I saw a few articles after the fact, stemming back to an incident in 2017 where Derek Chauvin held down a 14-year-old teenager for 17 minutes in a prone position. And that made me realize that why did we even have to get to this point? Why was not penalized and or fired at that potential time back then? So there were a lot of questions, you know, from my perspective, but overall, I was pretty satisfied with the verdict.
Sure. How about you, Casey?
Well, to be honest with you, I didn't follow it on a day-to-day basis. What I did see was challenging to watch at times. I understand that everyone is entitled to a defense. One of the things that was particularly hard for me was what appears to be character assassination. When we have incidents like this or Black males that are in the news for whatever reason. And some of the things that the defense was using was insulting to intelligence. But again, like I said, he has that right under the Constitution.
Sure.
But I didn't follow it as closely as some have, just because it was, in a sense, here we go again. We're watching this again. And as overwhelming, if you will, the evidence was, I wasn't sure if he was going to be found guilty.
Yeah.
And I was preparing myself for my household for that, you know, because I don't have to tell you what happened in 1992 in Los Angeles.
Right.
This I was thinking, and I hate that I had to think that, but I was thinking that this one is going to make that one look like a pizza party. Yeah. So I was nervous. Absolutely. And I have to admit it, I was.
Yeah. Mr. Attorney General, how about you? Did you watch on a daily basis?
So Thaddeus used the word duty. My 20-year-old son watched the trial, and he said it was his duty to do it. I will say that I was derelict in the duty, purposefully and by design, because I couldn't stand to watch it. It was too traumatic for me, frankly, and you know, every morning when I wake up, I would turn on down in Southern Nevada, channel 1020 CNN, and up here in Northern Nevada, channel 1200 CNN. And during the trial, I would turn it on, and if I were to see a face in that trial, I would immediately change the channel.
Yeah.
Because I knew it would be traumatic to even hear any bit of it. I couldn't watch it. It was too traumatic. In the immediate aftermath of George Floyd's, now we can say murder, and I was cautious with my words until the verdict came in, right? I called it a killing because he had been, Chauvin had been charged, but not yet convicted. Now we can say in the aftermath of his murder, I held, as you know, Quentin, several panel discussions in what was called my forum called Justice and Injustice. And it was heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, traumatic to continually have those discussions week after week, looking for ways that we could improve relationships between law enforcement and the communities that we serve. I even wrote an essay that I never published that talked about me having a perpetual headache that frankly felt like a migraine that I just couldn't get rid of. No matter how many aspirin I would take, it was that traumatic to me. And I didn't want to relive it, frankly. So I didn't watch it. That said, people in my office watched it from a professional development perspective at one level, right? To see how what ultimately proved to be a successful trial could be emulated here in our own state in the unfortunate event that my office ever had to engage in that type of trial. And I heard, tidbits from here and there, but I would always tell them, don't talk too much, because again, I don't want to deal with the trauma. At the end of the day, I do think that accountability was served. Justice for Chauvin, yes. Justice for Mr. Floyd, no. Accountability for Chauvin, yes. And at the end of the day, I think that accountability is a step toward justice, but we continue to fight for perpetual justice.
I appreciate you lifting that up, and I appreciate you saying accountability, because that's how I felt when the verdict came. Because waiting that day was like a roller coaster for me. I had that knot in my stomach that I get when you get to the top of a roller coaster, or to put it more plainly and more relevant in this conversation, when an officer gets behind my car, that feeling that I get in my stomach. Now, my tags are paid, my insurance is good. I don't have any reason to think that I would be stopped or pulled over, but I still have that fear. And when they read the verdict, I wasn't jubilant. I saw a lot of my friends and associates on Facebook, social media, justice. Justice would be that George Floyd got to go home to his daughter. Justice would be that Darnella Frazier isn't riddled with nightmares for the rest of her life because she has survivor's guilt, is what some academics and legal analysts have been saying. So yes, I appreciate you saying accountability and not justice, because we still have a long way to go in that regard. I have adult nieces and nephews, right? My nephews are taller than me and bigger than me. My one nephew, I think, is 22. Johnny's got long locks down to his shoulders. And I'm always telling them, please be careful when you go out, nephew. Let me know when you get home. Now, home for them is Missouri. I'm some 3,000 miles away. The math might be wrong, folks. Don't auto check me. But I'm always worried for my nephews in Missouri. How did you talk to the young people in your life about this trial? Or even more broadly, how do you talk to the young people in your life about how they should interact with law enforcement? And I'll start with you, Mr. AG. I know you got 3 boys that are rock stars, man.
Yeah. My 3 sons and my nephew that we raised are continually keeping us proud. And it breaks our heart every time we have to have a new iteration of the talk, with my 3 sons and my nephew. Right after George Floyd was murdered, I was a recurrent appearance. I made recurrent appearances on television, and I remember a press conference at the Grand Sawyer building that I had with the governor and some others. Jason Frierson, I think, was there. Danielle Moreno. Look, I am the top law enforcement officer in the state. I'm in law enforcement. I have a badge. You understand? I'm part of law enforcement, and I get that. And I introduced myself as a person who, before being in law enforcement, was a black man married to a black woman, raising 3 black sons and a black nephew. And when I'm done being Attorney General, I will be a black man married to a black woman who has raised 3 black sons and a black nephew. And I have other, obviously, relatives in that regard. And it pains me. It hurts to, again, have different new versions, iterations of the talk. But we have it. You have to. It's a matter of survival. And it's an unfair burden that we as African American, in this instance, men, have to share over the course of our existence in this country, but it is a necessity. And we would be remiss if we did not have that conversation about what to do when you are engaging law enforcement, if you are approached by law enforcement, if you, as you say, Quentin, are in your vehicle and a cop pulls up behind you, what to do, what to say, what not to do, what not to say. And a recognition that even if you do everything right, there's a chance that you still may end up being hurt and may not make it home. After, and I'm gonna be quiet after this, but after George Floyd was murdered, we also heard about around that time period, Ahmaud Arbery, who was killed by former police persons. And my wife got on me one time in particular because it was after dark. It was a Friday night. Our trash day is Saturday, and they come early in the morning. They wake me up sometimes at 6:30, coming and picking up our trash. And I had my today 16-year-old, but today literally his birthday is today. He's 16, but he was 15 then. And I told him to take the trash out, as we do every week. And my wife got mad. She says, "Don't send my son out in the dark to the curb to take out the trash." I'm concerned. I'm nervous. We live in a neighborhood that they may not know him. My middle son is athletic and jogs around the neighborhood, not anymore. And that's unfair. So we continue to have these conversations. We've had them since the Chauvin trial. As I've indicated, my 20-year-old son, who's had a profound impact, we'll talk about this later, but a profound impact on me and the way what I've done when I was in the state Senate and what I do as Attorney General about the repercussions of this trial, again, acknowledging that it's accountability and not justice, and that the fight for perpetual justice continues.
Mm-hmm. You know what disheartens me so is when you just go through the laundry list of regular things that we can't do with the same freedom that we see other people do. I should be able to take the trash out. Your son should be able to take the trash out. Your son should be able to jog. I should be able to be in my home on my couch without fear that someone will mistakenly go to the wrong apartment and then kill me. It just is enraging to have to live with the limitations in life that you see other people that are not Black don't have to live with. I'm going to pose the question to KC. KC, brother, you are an activist. You are a community member. How do you talk to the young Black men you encounter about law enforcement, or how did you talk to them about this trial?
Well, one of the things that I do when I speak to young people, my nephews in particular, is I want them to be 100% aware that this is the real deal. One of the things that I find interesting about Black folks in general is we say we a lot, because I know that there's nothing special about me. So what I mean by that is, if I was in Minneapolis and I happened to be in that same convenience store with George Floyd, that could have been me on the ground. Mm-hmm. There's nothing to differentiate between George Floyd and me. So one of the things that I talk to these young people about is to be 100% aware of how serious this situation is. People tend to say, "Oh, well, don't worry about it. Ain't nothing gonna happen. That ain't gonna happen to me." But we are seeing time and time again that that's not necessarily the case. And it can happen, and it does. The second thing I talk to them about is know what your rights are, your civil rights and your civil liberties. I say they're yours. Shouldn't you know what they are and how to use them? So education is another big part of this. Understanding the temperature of today, and then know your rights as a citizen in this country.
That's a very good point. And I say it's a good point because so much of the work we do at Make It Work Nevada is about education. Know your rights. Understand that you can call your legislator and say, hey, I support this bill, or call your county commission and say, hey, I had this encounter with Metro this week, wasn't right. So often, folks, what we have found, they're so busy just trying to make it work. No pun intended. They're literally trying to figure out, how am I going to make my rent this month? COVID has ravaged our state. It has devastated countless families that were already on the margins. So getting folks to understand the importance of knowing their rights often takes a back seat to them getting through the day. And that's what's really heartbreaking. We don't even have a situation in our country, I would argue, where folks are able to be full citizens, where they're able to actively engage in this process of democracy and government, and understanding that you have rights that you can say have been infringed on. Thaddeus, I wanted to bring you in, brother, because you have a young, adorable son that I think is 4 or 5 now. Did you engage him in conversations about this trial, or have you had the talk with him yet?
So it's really heartbreaking and difficult for me, because I remember when the video initially came out with George Floyd being murdered by Derek Chauvin. We can call it that. My wife refused to watch the video. She, for a while, couldn't come to terms with me going outside of the house because she was fearful that her husband might not come back. Her children's father might not return back home. So, yes, absolutely. I have that talk with not only my son, who just turned 4, but my daughter as well, because she's going to grow up to be a Black woman. And Black women have to face that same burden that Black men do as well. Often at times it's not heard or seen, but I want to make sure, rightfully so, I'm spreading that wealth of knowledge to both my children. And it's hard because they're toddlers now, so they're not going to understand if I'm trying to talk to them and give an explanation of what's going on in the world. But if I could just give one specific story, really, last night I'm reading the Little Engine That Could to both my children before bed, and going through the illustration, and they see a clown in the book, and they're both so afraid because they see that clown, and that clown seems evil and mean. I had to take time to explain to them that no, specifically in this situation, this clown, the world might, give you a certain perception of clowns being scary or not for you, but specifically this clown is here to help in this situation. So it's just applying it in different contexts, especially when your children are not of age to understand what's going on in the world, but also taking that time to make sure they understand, that not everyone in this world are meant to be good to you or to bring good to you. So it's difficult.
I can't imagine. I really can't imagine. And I want to thank you for lifting up the fact that Black women are not exempt from this. We've seen Sandra Bland. We saw a Tatiana Jefferson in Kentucky. We saw just Ma'Khia Bryant. I think about Corinne. Oh gosh, I forget her name. Corinne's her first name, but I forget her last name. And that was the most devastating story for me, because I saw her picture. I'm like, you look like my cousin. I got a cousin that looks just like you. That just broke my heart. And in her particular story, if I remember correctly, she was holding her son when she was shot by law enforcement. And they came into her home because I think she had sidestepped a bench warrant. The particulars of that I don't remember because it was some time ago. But the point being that Black women are not exempt from this either. So thank you for lifting that up. I really appreciate it. I want to take a little bit of a turn to our relationship, the relationship between Black people and law enforcement. And so often what we speak about is not getting our hopes up for justice, because there have been so many circumstances where we've seen officers not held accountable. This week, the Las Vegas Review-Journal published an in-depth investigation that outlined misconduct is a graceful way to put it of officers in the Henderson Police Department. And what their investigation revealed was that so many of these infractions occurred over the span of their careers, often without any disciplinary measures. In many cases, folks were promoted, they were commended. One guy, he got to retire voluntarily with his 6-figure pension. I want to ask this question specifically to the Attorney General, because you are the top law enforcement in the state. Help us understand, Mr. AG, why it's so challenging for officers to be held accountable when they abuse their power.
Listen, it's a great question, and it's a fair question, and it's a question that we talked about quite frequently during the forum that I held on justice and injustice. That forum, for your edification, in case you didn't watch it, included conversations with legislators and about ways in which they could enact legislation for more accountability. It included conversations with community members about ideas that they had, whether it was the ACLU or Force Trajectory or others, on ways that we could increase accountability. It included conversations with "quote unquote" the brass, sheriffs and chiefs. It included conversations with officers who were on the beat, no pun intended. And we had these conversations to determine what actual policies and procedures we can put in place that would be enforced. It reminds me, it's a good transition from your last question about how I talk to my children about this. In 2014, in November or so, Tamir Rice was killed in Cleveland, and he was 12. I had a son, my middle boy, who's 20 now. He had just turned 14 a month before, and he told me he was scared and said I shouldn't have to be afraid being around policemen. And he said, "Dad, you're in the state Senate. I need you to do something about that. I need you to help pass some laws that are going to help me feel safer." He said, "Make them wear body cameras." And so that next legislative session, as minority leader in the state Senate, with my son volunteering to testify in favor of my bill, we passed legislation that required at that point all DPS officers, only DPS for the state, from state officers, to wear body cameras. And that was a direct response to accountability requests from not just the public, but my family, my son. And 2 years later, as majority leader, I expanded that requirement to all officers who have general interactions with the public. And so that's one of the ways that we can do what I call either augment trust between law enforcement and communities that we serve, restore trust where it's been diminished, or to create it where it's never existed in the first place. Other things that we can do from an accountability perspective. Your question is, why is it so hard to hold people accountable? Some officers would say, well, it's not true. We are held accountable. And so the question becomes, well, why don't we know about it? And so one of the things that I've looked to do is to see how to codify or put into law the types of accountabilities that are there, and then to have transparency for those accountabilities, for those who run afoul of policies and laws and practices. And so some of the things that grew out of the forum were enacted in the law last session. A duty to intervene now is not just the policy of local departments that have a policy. It is now state law, meaning that if an officer sees one of his or her colleagues violating the constitutional rights or any rights of one of the residents of this state, they have a duty now under law to intervene. And that's a requirement now in state law, as is the ban on chokeholds, which was a direct response to George Floyd's murder. The state Senate and the state legislature and the governor, they passed and signed that into law. And currently what I'm doing as the top law enforcement officer in the state is passing additional accountability and transparency measures, including, speaking of women who are subjected to this, a bill that is in direct response to Breonna Taylor's killing in Louisville, Kentucky, where I'm sponsoring a bill to limit drastically the use of no-knock warrants, which is the type of warrant that was used in the ultimate killing of Breonna Taylor. And a second bill that I have is one that provides my office the ability to do what we call pattern and practice investigations into police departments in our state that are alleged to have unconstitutional policing practices against particular demographic groups, so to speak. So those are some of the ways that we can improve accountability. And some of the reasons why it's been difficult to do so, I think, is, there is some level of inertia No one really likes change, especially those who have become accustomed to a certain way of doing things and a certain way of engaging. But it's time out for that. Yeah. We're changing that, and I'm proud to see that this happening across the street. I'm in Carson right now. Across the street in the legislative building, you got people like Senator Dallas Harris, who's taken a lot of arrows in her back from folks who don't like what she's doing, but she's trying to pass legislation that's going to improve the relationships, again, between law enforcement and communities that we serve.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for saying that, Mr. Attorney General, because what I'm hearing you say is that there's also space for community to be engaged in this process. The Attorney General, our state legislators, they can't fix all the things, right? But with our collective involvement, with our ongoing involvement, that's how we spur change. There is a great deal of inertia to change. I think that's just human nature. But when you look at the history of the United States, we've never made progress. We've never had justice without people being engaged and without people being uncomfortable. I suspect that Rosa Parks wasn't terribly comfortable sitting down on that seat on that bus way back when, but that action spurred the civil rights movement, which brought to light all the injustices and all the freedoms and demands that Black folks were saying, hey, we're here, we have lives, we deserve humanity and dignity. So yes, it's human nature to sidestep change or to be resistant to change, but we're in a change moment. And it's requiring everyone, whether you're elected or not, it's requiring everyone to come to the table and make their voice heard so that we can push over the finish line into progress that is gonna save the lives of our community members, my nephews, the Attorney General's sons, the young people that KC works with, Thaddeus's children. It's on all of us. So if you aren't involved, get involved with someone that's working to bring this change forward. That's us at Make It Work Nevada. That's our friends at Mass Liberation Project, Force Trajectory, Plan, Make the Road, any of them.
Yeah. I want to ask. If I can augment my statement just real quickly, I just want to. Absolutely. Look, because here's what's also important. You're right. Community groups speaking up, speaking out, and demanding responses. One of the things I'm proud of thus far is the two bills that I've talked about have been unanimously passed. You heard what I said, unanimously. Yep. Democrats and Republicans, pro-cops and pro-cop reform. They came together with the bills that I had, and we worked on these together to find a path forward. Unanimously, they came out of their committees in their respective houses, and unanimously they passed out of their respective houses and are now going to be heard in the other house. As early as next week, I'm having bills on pattern and practice. I'm having my bills on pattern and practices heard in the Senate, and I'm having my no-knock warrant bill heard in the Assembly. And so it's important to note that, right? We are very quick to chastise when people aren't doing what's right. We also have to acknowledge when people are doing things that are right. And it's, I think, a good sign that unanimously people are listening to the requirements and demands of the community for change. And I think that's important, and we should note that. And the last thing I'll say, you mentioned the article. I won't speak much on that article, except to say that I know Chief Andres in Henderson, and he ain't no joke. He's a brother who invited me to come out and speak to his graduating class of new officers a few months back, knowing my position on police reform. And that was by design, because he is listening, and whatever went on, I think occurred before his time there, he will get to the bottom of it. I'm confident of that. And I wanted to give a shout out to Chief Andres for that, as we all should.
Absolutely. I want to shout out your bills that were passed unanimously, because I have a bill that we're running and it saves our state some money. And you don't have to be a politico to know that Nevada's got some fiscal problems. And even with a bill that saved money, I still couldn't get no Republican support. So I want to shout out the Attorney General on those pieces of legislation. To KC and Thaddeus, and I'll start with KC. Can you outline for us, brother, what it will take for law enforcement to regain trust with Black communities? What are your thoughts on that?
How much time do you have?
Oh, man.
No. One of the things that I was thinking about last night is accountability. and the fact that police are public servants and they're paid with taxpayer dollars. And I was thinking, police officers have to be post-certified. And there's 3 levels of post-certification. I would like to see when these officers are committing these, referencing the article, I believe that was Arthur Kane who wrote that, having that revoked. Because I'm thinking of doctors, I'm thinking of nurses, when they are engaged in wrongdoing, they have their license revoked, and they're not public servants. I think the same should apply for law enforcement. When you talk about these citizens review boards, who are these people? Do they have a direct tie to law enforcement? Oftentimes when we see these disciplinary boards, etc., we're asking the police to police themselves. And is that fair? How can we be assured that our issues are really being heard and addressed in a non-biased way? So one of the other things is when a police officer is fired, there should be a press conference to say this person betrayed the public trust, the license that was given to him by the state. We hold him to a higher standard, so he's no longer an officer. Visually seeing things like that and understanding, wow, they take this conduct serious, will give people more confidence to know, hey, maybe my voice will be heard, my complaint will be heard. But when you see like Derek Chauvin and other officers who have 20, 30, 40 complaints, and then finally, they do something that's just horrendous, it's, yeah, well, how is this person still able to be collecting a 6-figure salary that some of those officers in Henderson were doing and engage in this type of conduct? Yeah. So that transparency is really needed, because I called the post certification board. I saw their newsletters, if you will. There was a lot of information on there. And then I asked the lady, I said, I called and said, well, how many officers have lost their post certifications? That's not public information. All the public information that I could access was positive. And I appreciate the positive, but at the same time, that's not showing me the steps you're taking to get rid of the bad apples, so to speak.
Sure.
Because a few bad apples spoils the bunch.
Yeah.
So let's have that transparency to let the public know we understand what you're saying. We take this serious, and if you're messing up, just like at any other job, you're gonna lose your job.
Yeah. The bad apple analogy I appreciate. I heard Trevor Noah, who, typically we regard Trevor Noah as a comedian, but he has had such fierce commentary on these infractions, right? These killings. And he says, we're not dealing with a couple of bad apples. It seems like the tree is rotted. And that just really resonated. I mean, it just struck a chord, because yes, it feels like it's ongoing when you think back. Maybe not police violence no, that's not true either. I think about, police being hosed and watered down during the civil rights movement. Or I think about Bloody Sunday, when law enforcement was able to violently assault people who were peacefully trying to demonstrate their desire for voting rights. It just feels like it hasn't stopped. Thad, I want to ask you, man, what, in your opinion, what will it take for law enforcement to regain trust in Black communities? And you bring a unique perspective, right? Because if I remember correctly, you were an applicant with Metro, right?
Absolutely. I was going through the application process for Metro, because in my mind, I'm a stand-up individual who I am of the community. and I always say it's far and few in between where I see African American men and or women representing, whether it's Metro, whether it's Henderson PD, and I did get caught up in the recruitment process on technicality, but in my mind, the first thing I think of is it's the lack of accountability for me, specifically, and I think Casey was mentioning that like bad apple theory. And that's a coin phrase that we often use a lot, but the problem is that theory underestimates the need for systematic reform in policing. And when I say that, I say that to mean there's so many flaws and errors in the system because you have the good cops, per se, but those cops become complicit through either non-action, non-reporting of misconduct when they see something, or lying to cover up their counterparts. I think about, and the reason I always, I bring up the George Floyd murder with Derek Chauvin is because it's the most profound thing that's happened most recently. But if my memory serves me correct, those other 4 police officers, whether they're consider themselves good cops or not, they're involved to some capacity. And to stand by while a man is being murdered, it's just not right, so that's where that concept comes in because, and this is a quote I pulled from some article, I can't remember the source, but the quote said, when you have so many good apples spending time defending bad apples, it's hard to tell which apples are which. So it points you back to that concept that it isn't just a few bad apples, it's a systematic problem from the top down that fails to oversee misconduct and hold problem cops accountable. I was grateful that Derek Chauvin was held accountable, but how many times have we seen, bad police officers that weren't held accountable for murdering, Black lives? I even think about, and I hate to keep bringing up different instances, but Laquan McDonald, I don't know if everyone remembers that. And it's hard for me to think about instances from the 90s because I'm a 90s baby, so I only can talk about things that seem relevant to me. And that's why I always appreciate, older gentlemen really just shedding light on things that happened before my time because, it gives you context. But that specific scenario, the police officer or officer shot that young Black man 16 times in 2014 in Chicago. And when asked, other officers considered that shooting justified. So, I think it's really certain officers having that tunnel vision and not being able to see things from a humanity standpoint.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I say it spoils the whole bunch.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They say a few bad apples, but it's never really completed. That analogy is never really completed. And I'm not just talking. We're not just talking about Black folks too, but think about Mario Gonzalez in California, who just died sitting in the park. So it's just not about Black folks. But I would like to see some.
Sorry.
Yeah, I want to let them finish though, but yeah.
I say, but one of the things is, Attorney General, is that we need policing. No one's saying to get rid of the police. We need good quality policing. I want to live in a safe neighborhood, and I can't imagine someone who will say, I do not want to live in a safe neighborhood. So we all do. We just want the professionalism that we know that can be there.
Yeah. It's interesting.
And I'm sorry.
I always talk about the neighborhood I grew up in, which was the type of community that frankly didn't have much trust in government and specifically law enforcement. To be sure, to your point, KC, we sometimes were okay with them coming when bad things were happening, but sometimes bad things happened when they came. And that's an acknowledgement. That's how I grew up. That was the existence that I had. And so we have to work to create trust where it doesn't exist. And to your question of how law enforcement can gain some trust in that regard. I think what we also have to do, and I said this a minute ago, is to acknowledge when they're doing the right thing. The Derek Chauvin trial had cops testifying against Derek Chauvin. The right thing to do. And in the immediate aftermath of George Floyd, we had our local police officers and their chiefs and their sheriffs likewise speaking out saying that was wrong. That was a first in a long time, if ever, that had happened. And I think partially it was because we were a captive audience, right? We were in COVID. We couldn't be out and about hanging out at the park. We didn't have football and basketball and anything else on TV, right? We were seeing CNN and everywhere else relaying what was going on. And so recognizing then what I was hearing was positive. It was a positive step, which is why, for example, when I held these Justice and Injustice forums, I asked specifically what they were willing to do. And I would commend it to people's viewing. It's on demand. Cox has put my Justice and Injustice forum on demand. You can go to your little Cox remote and hit the microphone button and say, watch Justice and Injustice, and you will see opportunities to watch law enforcement saying, we agree with these types of changes, right? They said it last summer, but some of them backed off of it, right? And that's always a concern that I have, is that people will be hot and bothered right in the immediate aftermath, but then they get complacent and think people will forget about what happened and forget about their promises and then not do something. The benefit that we have with my two bills, Quentin, the reason why they were unanimous was because I got everybody in the room. And this is to their commendation. I expect them to do it, to be sure, but the fact that they did it should be commended, because a lot of people don't do it. I had unions in the room. I had the top brass in the room. I had the ACLU in the room. I had district attorneys in the room. I had public defenders in the room, and my office in the room. We all worked together to draft language that was going to move the ball forward. And that is something that I think is also important in terms of us being able to get to have the community trust law enforcement, for them to do what's right as they're doing right now. It's not perfect, to be sure, and there are more things that can be done, to be sure, but I want to give credit where it's due, and we should do that as well.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great segue into my final question, because I want us to end on a hopeful note. All is not lost. We have seen in state legislatures across the country, even our own, the Attorney General has outlined many of the policies that are being debated in this current legislative session, where we're trying to change some of the injustices that we've seen in other states so that they don't happen here. So bills like SB 50, right? We don't ever want to have a Breonna Taylor situation happen in Nevada. We also have other bills like AB 158, which revises the possession of cannabis and alcohol for juveniles. In a state where alcohol and cannabis is legal, the status quo says that if a young person is caught with those things, they're automatically filed in court, criminal court. With that bill, it will revise those provisions so that our young people don't start their lives out in the criminal justice track, because once you get there, it's hard to get out, and it significantly closes what opportunities you have for your life. Other bills like Assembly Bill 116, that's a bill that will take traffic tickets out of criminal court and put them in civil court, because if you have a speeding ticket in Nevada, that can be considered a misdemeanor. So all is not lost. As well, I would say that across the country, we've seen instances where local district attorneys have taken on, they've been elected, and these are folks that have more, I say forward-thinking ideas around what criminal justice reform looks like. So all is not lost. I want to pose this question to all three of you gentlemen. How would you say we should measure progress in our justice system with trust and so on? Mr. Attorney General, I'll start with you.
Honestly, let me defer that question. I'd love to hear these responses before I chime in.
Okay. Well, then, Casey, I'll go to you first then, brother.
Oh, spoken like a true Dallas Cowboy fan. That's hard to quantify. One thing I will say, though, is I look back on the positive note. I looked up, where is it working? Dallas Fort Worth have they polled them, the community. 86% said they have a very good or somewhat good relationship with the police. Orlando, Florida, high 80 percentile as well. And so I started looking at what the police in the communities were doing. And one of the things Chief David Brown said is that he wants to do the front end work, be more involved in the community. That way, that will lead to less back end work, arresting people. They have to know, the community has to know that they care. And their job is not there to make their life harder or worse. It's to protect the community and be a part of the community, not just an entity that comes in every time there's some conflict, but be a part of the community. It's really going to manifest itself. It's really going to manifest, and it's going to show. The results are going to speak for themselves, if that makes sense. Because for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? So we will be able to look and see what the relationship and the temperature in the community is with the law enforcement. That's how we're going to know if it's working or not. Now, what are the things to do to make it work? It's a different topic, but
Yeah.
we'll be able to see it.
Thaddeus, I'm gonna go to you, brother.
Absolutely. So this is just going to lead to the positivity or the progress. But as I was saying before, until those good officers are willing to bear witness and hold those bad officers accountable, the line between good and bad is much closer than we'd really like to believe. But that line is there. And Attorney General Ford, I appreciate you even shedding light on those positive things, because our media does a really good job at mitigating or minimizing any positive and bringing to light all negative. So we don't often hear positive things in terms of policing or police involvement with community. And, the media controls a lot. So that exposure that the public receives usually is negative far often than positive. But you have an individual of the community that wanted to join the ranks of police. So I believe that even though that line is thin, it is that line is there. That line is present. And, just like Casey was mentioning, it really is something that just has to manifest over time. Whether that's, the bad seeds weaning out and the good coming in, and it just sort of revamping from that point. But it's just, my parents always taught me it starts at home and spreads abroad. So just bringing humanity back to people, because the parents who may potentially be officers, their children are looking at them and they're saying, you know what, I want to be like my dad, or I want to be like my mom. And where do you think those new officers are coming from? They're coming from influence. So it's really just starting from home and just spreading abroad, honestly.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. AG, I'll let you wrap it up.
Yeah, and that's the reason why I wanted to kind of go last, because it's important for us to recognize some commonalities there. And I heard some commonalities as they spoke, and the similar to the things that I'm going to say. Look, this is not rocket science. It's just not rocket science. Black and brown folks, minority folks, just don't want to be killed at the hands of law enforcement. In the context and the circumstances that we're talking about, right? I mean, to be sure, you got bad folks out there who do some bad things, and sometimes they meet a bad outcome. That's not what we're talking about. Let's be clear. And so the thing that we want to see is progress in that arena. I like this notion of being engaged in the community. I have what we call my 5 C's in this office. We operate under the hashtag, our job is justice. If you were to ask any of the 400 folks who work in my office what our job is, they should say, and they would say, I would imagine, our job is justice. And that's justice for all. And it doesn't always manifest itself in an arrest and a conviction. Sometimes it manifests itself in exoneration. And I've been able to participate in 6 exonerations and paying folks who were wrongly convicted, as an example. Sometimes it manifests itself in a diversion. And so recognizing that that is what justice can look like sometimes, we should also recognize the importance of one of my other C's, or one of my 5 C's, I say, and that's community engagement. Having our folks out there, and my people are out there, today, for example, at 4:30, or maybe it's at 4 o'clock, I'm going to be holding the third of a series of things that I call conversations with the AG, because I want people to be able to talk to me. It's going to be virtually live streamed with questions we take from the audience from all across Nevada. And that's the type of thing that we have to do. And by the way, some of that's happening. Thaddeus said, thank me for highlighting the positive. It's happening. Some of that's happening. And we have to say that. You have to say it, Thaddeus. Casey, you have to say it. Quentin, you have to tell the people in your circle that, in fact, there are some positive things. That said, and I'm going to be quiet on this, just because you acknowledge the good stuff doesn't mean you got to be quiet on the bad stuff. And I'm not suggesting you do that. I'm saying you have to do both of those things. And a little story as I close. I remember when I ran for this position in particular, for Office of Attorney General. I had been in the state Senate for a number of years already. I ran the police camera bills, as I indicated, and I ran some other criminal justice reform related bills. And there was a contingency of law enforcement that didn't want me to ascend to this position. They thought I hated cops. And I tried my best to persuade them that that is not the case. I just believe in accountability. When you do good, I'm gonna pat you on the back. When you do bad, I'm gonna call it out. And support from those who recognized who I was and where I came from was very much appreciated, because they knew it wasn't about me hating cops. It was about me wanting accountability, period, point blank. And at the end of the day, those are some of the ways that we continue to improve the relationships between law enforcement and the communities that we serve. I'm dedicated to it. I would not be dissuaded from speaking out on issues like this. Again, I will end the same way I began. I am a Black man married to a Black woman, raising 3 Black sons and a Black nephew. I will die that way. And I am just going to speak to this issue, because if I don't, sitting in this position right now, it is the utmost waste of responsibility, and it's an affront to my ancestors. So thank you for having me on. I appreciate it, Quentin. This was a great conversation.
Very great conversation. Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Listen, I really appreciate each of you for joining us for this very special conversation, this special broadcast of Always on Trial, the relationship between Black people and law enforcement. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you are looking for an organizing home, Make It Work Nevada is your organizing home. Please stay connected with us through our social media channels or visit our website at makeitworknevada.org. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.